Let's discuss with John Sandwig, who held the same job as Tom Homan, former acting director of Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and MSNBC contributor Paula Ramos. So, Paula, Tom Homan as border czar. You've got South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, looks like she's going to be the DHS secretary, plus Stephen Miller back in the mix. What do these picks tell you?
I mean, I think these are people that we know will enable Donald Trump's worst instincts, right? I think this is a moment where I believe history won't just be repeating itself, but we're about to enter, I think, a darker, crueler, uglier version of the past. That past, I think, forces us to think about Homan, right? Homan is literally the intellectual father, the architect of family separation. I mean, according to The Atlantic in 2022, the great Caitlin Dickerson already inferred that in 2014, Homan was already pitching the idea of family separation. So basically, he is the one that understood that if you weaponize cruelty, that could serve as a deterrent. He shamelessly has understood that cruelty is the point. We know that in 2014, the Obama administration thought that family separation was too heartless. It was then, of course, implemented under the Trump administration. But I think the difference between then and now is that here you have Homan that will be enabled by Trump loyalists like Stephen Miller, people that literally believe in the great replacement theory, that are so preoccupied with preserving whiteness, that will perhaps govern with a little bit more revenge. And so the question is, what will that look like when you enable the most visceral anti-immigrant sentiments in this country?
John, former DHS official in Trump's first administration, Olivia Troy, weighed in on the border czar pick of Homan. And she writes this, quote, as acting ICE director, Tom Homan chose to spread disinfo about California wildfires, saying an undocumented immigrant had started them. He went on to attack the local sheriff's office while they were in the middle of dealing with a crisis, natural disaster, asking them to hand over the individual to ICE. The immigrant had nothing to do with the wildfires. Those of us working at DHS who were actually committed to Homeland Security watched this with horror internally as it played out. John, your reaction to this pick, do you have concerns?
Well, look, I have concerns with the Trump, campaign promises for mass deportation. And there's a lot of talk right now, and Tom is saying some of the right things. Hey, we're going to focus on criminals first. We're going to get the worst first out. But when you're talking about the numbers that they're talking about, 1 million in the first year or 11 million over the 4 years. Those are not criminals. If you look back at 2019, the last year before the pandemic of the Trump administration, they arrested 123,000 people either charged with or were convicted with a crime. So there was no lack of political will during that time. It was just that there are not large swaths of criminal undocumented immigrants operating in this country. The other concern I have on it is, when you set these numerical goals, 1 million in the first year, is that's a quantitative approach instead of a qualitative approach. And what by that I mean is there are some at-large criminals operating in this country. There are transnational gang members who are not in custody of a state or local jail who are committing horrific crimes in the United States. Nowhere near as many as the Trump campaign alleged, but they are operating. To get those individuals, though, for ICE is very tedious work. It takes a lot of manpower. It takes undercover operations, traditional law enforcement tactics. The point is it results in a very low number of arrests, but of a higher quality. And unfortunately, that's not the approach the administration has said, the incoming administration said they're going to take. They're going for mass deportations, which means the lower hanging fruit of the immigration system, the population that's been here a long time, the parents of the 4.4 million U.S. citizens who have an undocumented parent. That's who's going to be, by and large, targeted when you're talking the numbers they're talking about.
How do you see these mass deportations operationally playing out, and where could it hit some hurdles?
Well, it's going to be incredibly difficult for them to pull this off. And I think you're going to have to look for two things. One is they're going to go to Congress. We heard the speaker earlier talking about the budget process. They're going to need a massive infusion of capital. I know they're talking about enlisting state and local law enforcement. I fully expect them to do that. I know they're talking about using the military. But at the end of the day, you can't get anywhere near the kind of numbers they're talking about without a significant increase in the number of ICE agents and a significant expansion of detention camps. Even if you get that money, it's going to be incredibly difficult to deploy it. One thing I think we should be concerned with is if they get a huge infusion of cash to hire new agents, how much vetting and how much training are they going to be doing before they deploy those agents? In the normal course, it would take years before you could deploy the agents. You would imagine they'll cut some corners in background checks and training, and which creates its own problems. But look, fundamentally, the biggest problem they face is due process of law. In this country, before you can be deported, you have an opportunity to do a full and fair hearing before an immigration court. That means you can present defenses to deportation. deportation, I'm going to be persecuted in my home country. Maybe it's I'm a U.S. citizen, but you have a right to this process. That is the biggest impediment. That is, the courts are backlogged. There's more than 3 million cases pending. There's nowhere near enough judges. So what does that mean? That's why you hear talk of Alien Enemies Act. That's why they're looking at executive actions and regulations where they can bypass the courts or just turn them into a rubber stamp. So I think that's what we need to keep our eye on, is how are they going to try to minimize the access to courts for these immigrants? Because unless they can do that, they'll never get close to achieving their goals of 1 million in a year.
Paolo, you talked about cruelty being the point, and I wonder, this argument we're hearing that you go about these mass deportations, fear ripples through the community. People actually will just self-deport. Do you see that happening?
I think that's what they want. I think that's so much of the heart of Trumpism strategy right now, to create so much fear, anxiety, uncertainty, chaos, that they want people to be driven out of the country from that fear. I also think that the difference, again, between then and now is that I think the Trump campaign literally believes that they were given a mandate by American voters to do this, right? And I think that will really mean that regardless of all the different hurdles that they will be faced with, they will try with everything that they can. The other difference, though, is that in the last 10 years, the groundwork, right, these immigrant rights activists, the Latino community, everyone has also been building a coalition that is a lot stronger now than it was 10 years ago. And so while people will perhaps be driven by self-deportation, I do sense, and I've already been speaking to people that are ready for this moment, right, ready to protect, ready to become sanctuaries, and ready to counter what the Trump administration is about to do.